Garrett Sandler here. Time to do a Rangers Q&A. Thanks to those of you who submitted questions on the Twitter earlier today. Let's start with Gage, I think, Gauge, Gage Starrett, 13. Do you think the Rangers could potentially afford to overpay a big-name free agent in the offseason with the low budget yet promising pitching rotation we have currently, similar to the 2010-2011 season? I don't think the low budget will remain a low budget. So, yes, I do think the Rangers could potentially, I shouldn't say potentially, I think the Rangers can afford to overpay or appropriately pay a big name free agent. I think a lot of the moves the Rangers have made here recently have been designed to free themselves of long-term financial commitments so that they can re-enter the free agency market in a very competitive manner. I think they've got the ability to make two, maybe even three big-time contract signings, but I don't necessarily think they are going to, nor do I think they need to do them all this upcoming offseason. And I would say that while we all want someone of that caliber to join the organization, it's going to happen. And if it's not this offseason, then it's going to happen maybe twice over next offseason. But yes, they definitely have the necessary money to do that. This from Deborah. Do you think the Rangers have any chance of signing Carlos Correa? I do. Now, it's always fair and necessary to ask, why would that player want to come here? For instance, a guy 37 years old who is desperately chasing his first World Series and maybe views himself as someone with 2 years left in his career would not want to come to the Rangers. All right. And that's an extreme example, but just to lay it out, it almost doesn't matter how much money you would offer that guy. Yes, there are times when teams will go over what maybe appropriate market value is because they don't have a lot that they can truly offer the player other than money. And if that's important to the player, then maybe it will work. Case in point, Alex Rodriguez. What would Carlos Correa find enticing about coming to the Rangers? Well, one, the future does look bright. I know it's tough to really recognize that in the middle of a rough season, but the future is bright. He can stay in a state with no income tax, if that means anything. But I think the biggest selling point is that Carlos Correa can be the face of the franchise and the face of the turnaround. He would easily be the best player on the roster the moment the Rangers signed him. And from everything I've been able to gather and from what I've been told about Carlos Correa, that's a challenge he would love. He is the type of guy who's got the right kind of ego where he thinks that he is capable of doing something like that. And the idea that he could be credited as the guy who turned this all around and helped lead the Rangers to their first World Series title is something that he would love. Now, does that mean he's definitely coming here? No. And is that his top priority in free agency to find a team that he can be the face of the I don't know. You know, the Yankees are likely going to be interested in a shortstop. The bright lights of New York are tough to turn down for some guys. And Carlos Correa seems to have a personality that would be fitting in New York. It'd be an interesting dynamic with the Astros hate, and that would apply here as well. But I do think that that is something that could be enticing to Carlos Correa, and he is the right age for that sort of a challenge. Sean wants to know, who is the one guy the Rangers need to set their sights on this offseason? Carlos Correa is number 1A, and Trevor Story is number 1B. Those are the two guys that I would most heavily invest my time and obviously potentially money in. I don't need both, but I would love one. And I think the separator for me is I need a guy who is willing to come into this situation, what we just outlined with Carlos Correa, and be willing to be the face of the turnaround, because it is more than just playing 162 games when that's heaped on you. You've got to really embrace that and be ready for that. And that's, I think, important, and helping to reestablish the culture is important as well. Brent wants to know, it's been reported the Rangers are going to spend money this offseason. How do you realistically see them spending it? I think that they are going to actively pursue one of those two shortstops. I think the Rangers could very well try and lure a guy like Max Scherzer here. I don't know if Max would want to come to this situation, but the idea would be, hey, sign him to 2 or 3 years, considering his age, and he could help, Carlos Correa, whoever else, reestablish the culture, set the tone. He's got that bulldog win at all cost mentality that a young team could benefit from. Now, I don't necessarily think that Max Scherzer is going to sign here, but that's the type of guy they could pursue. I think ultimately, it's going to be one big signing this offseason, and then maybe other moves to supplement, or it's one big signing and, hey, next offseason, we're going to see another one, maybe another 2 big signings. They also could perhaps go after a guy like Chris Bryant, Nick Castellanos, but I think shortstop's top priority. Cornell, where do you see the new young pitchers fitting in on the major league squad? Who's up? Who's sent down to start next season? That's a great question. So I think you've got to consider Cole Winn as a candidate for opening day, the opening day rotation. Taylor Hearn, Dane Dunning, Colby Allard, Spencer Howard, AJ Alexy, Glenn Otto. I would not be surprised if Otto and Alexy start the year in AAA. I think that Dunning and Hearn are for sure in the rotation. I think Spencer Howard is as well. I think that there's a strong possibility that the Rangers got and signed 1, maybe 2 veterans just to provide some stability and also leadership. That's important. And it also allows these other pitchers to grow and take their time. Ultimately, I think all of those young guys I just mentioned will be in the rotation. To me, the big question is what the Rangers feel like they have in Colby Allard. I also wouldn't be surprised if you see a trade this offseason involving one of those guys and not Cole Winn. It's very possible a strength for strength type trade. But I think Hearn, Dunning, and Howard are in the rotation. Possibility of a couple of veteran additions. Maybe they bring back a guy like Jordan Lyles on a 1-year deal. I don't know, but someone like that. And ultimately, I think Otto and Alexy will get their shot. There's a possibility one of those guys is in the rotation. There's a possibility that they go a 6-man rotation with all their young arms. I think that's something worth considering as well. I think, though, not all of these guys are going to be up to start the year, but I think all of those guys I just listed will be major leaguers next year. And, with the natural attrition that is a part of the season, perhaps major leaguers for a significant period of time. Justin wants to know, what's the best case scenario for this offseason? And what would the worst case offseason look like? Justin, I think the best case scenario would be to sign Carlos Correa or Trevor Story. I think, again, 1A for me is Correa. I think what a lot of people would say worst case is if the Rangers swing and miss and don't get anyone. I would disagree. I think the worst case is you sign the wrong guy. And that's not something we might know right away. But I think it's a way better case that you don't make a big signing than signing the wrong guy. Case in point, Anthony Rendon. How bummed were we all when the Rangers lost out on Anthony Rendon? I mean, it seemed like people were ready to just absolutely throw fists, against a punching bag because they were so angry. How much of a blessing in disguise was that? Anthony Rendon has barely played. He hasn't really been good. Not sure that he's a great fit in that clubhouse, so it worked out. Signing the wrong guy is way worse than signing nobody. So that to me is the worst case scenario. James wants to know if Chris Young is more particularly involved in pitcher selection and development. My guess is he is. James, I think he's involved in all aspects. Obviously, he's got a different expertise in pitching, but I don't know that it would be fair to suggest that he really focuses on the pitchers and leaves the position players to someone else. I don't think there's any track record that suggests someone that was a position player can't evaluate pitching and vice versa. But I do think there is a different mindset perhaps for him with pitchers. Although it's also worth noting, he was a really unique pitcher and one that doesn't exist these days. He was not a fireball in 97 to 99 mile an hour pitcher with great stuff. He was more of a thinking man's pitcher. And, I think that probably influences things as well. I think ultimately he is just incredibly well-versed in baseball, and I think that's his best attribute. So those are some of the questions. Let's see quickly if I missed any. There was a question in here I believe I saw earlier that I might have looked over about whether or not the Rangers plan on moving Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. I think that, it really depends uh, what the Rangers do this offseason. I think ultimately Izzy's still got a long way to go to prove he's an everyday player. But I think it's a challenge that, he's constantly presenting himself with. We did get a question here. Anyone else who will be called up by the Rangers the rest of the way? I don't think so. So I don't think we'll see Josh Young or Sam Huff or anyone else that might have been on your list for call-ups. All right, there you go. That's our Rangers Q&A. We'll do another one. Maybe try to do one a week the rest of the way, but I appreciate you guys submitting your questions. Talk to you later.